Hello friends, thank you for stopping by. My name is Sona. I am a content creator, a journalist, a mom of three, and I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I happen to have a film degree. I recently watched the new Disney live-action adaptation of Snow White, and I would like to discuss with you not only the flaws of the film in terms of storytelling, but also discuss with you how Disney should have solved the problems it saw in the original 1937 version of the Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. So we will analyze the plot of the 2025 version of Snow White, the 1937 version of Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and we will compare it to The Tale of the Dead Princess and Seven Knights, written by Alexander Pushkin, paired with a 1951 Soviet adaptation of the Pushkin's tale, hand-drawn animated feature film, The Tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Knights. Spoiler alerts, I will be discussing all the versions in detail, including the new live-action film, so if you are still planning to watch it, don't do it. But if you are, then maybe come back to this video a little later. So without further ado, let's dive right into the magical world of princesses, dwarfs, princes who are bandits now, and queens who should never sing. Let's try to imagine the executives of Disney having this first meeting in early 2016 and deciding that the original 1937 version of Snow White doesn't work anymore, and they were discussing how to modernize the story. One of the biggest criticisms of the Disney 1937 version of Snow White is that the protagonist is passive and lacks agency, fitting in the outdated damsel in distress trope. It's a very shallow view on the 1937 version because its main character, lacks neither agency nor character, even though I suppose her innocence and kindness and generosity and femininity are a little different from the modern day ideals of a woman. The live-action remake tried to fix this and give Snow White a larger ambition than just love and marriage, because apparently dreaming of a true love is extremely outdated, as Rachel Zegler stated. Because of course it's very common for a medieval young princess to become the queen and the leader and the ruler of the country. I personally always felt like Brother Grimm's original story is a larger metaphor of a Christian soul longing for its prince to come and take us to his kingdom. So it's an allegory of the church as a bride and Christ as a groom who comes to take us to his kingdom. And don't ask me why, but as a kid I always suspected that Snow White actually died in the film, and then the prince that comes is either angel or Christ himself who comes to wake her up and take her as a bride to his kingdom. But of course all of these metaphors were overwritten due to misunderstanding of the original story and its main character, most importantly. So another problem that the live-action film had with the 1937 version was that they didn't want to portray little people as dwarfs. Featuring little people as dwarfs would not be politically correct, even though little people also need jobs in Hollywood. Then follows the famous non-consensual kiss of unconscious person at the end, because in 2025 it's problematic when the boy who is in love initiates a kiss with a girl who is in love with him as well. But the bigger issue is that Snow White was unconscious when the prince kissed her. Then follows the problem of the one-dimensional evil queen whose only ambition is to be the fairest of them all. Then for some reason they didn't like the fact that Snow White in the original story cleans the dwarf's house when she just arrives there before she meets them, as a gesture of gratitude in hopes of staying and receiving hospitality from the dwarfs. Another problem, of course, was that Snow White was saved by a dude. We all remember that interview, so they didn't want the Snow White who will be saved by a prince. So they made this live-action film with a completely different main character, which is probably not the worst film they've ever made. There are some worse ones in my memory. However, it's a completely different story with elements of Snow White. The story that is poorly conceived, anticlimactic, and incomplete. Instead of completely rewriting the original story, a few tweaks here and there could have made this story suitable for the modern audiences. If only someone from the team of the writers of the new live-action film was curious enough to see maybe there was someone else who have solved these problems before us and from whom we can learn. No one did that. However, all these problems were already resolved in the 19th century by the greatest Russian poet, Alexander Pushkin, in his Tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Knights, which we will discuss in detail along with 1951 animated Soviet feature film, The Tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Knights, which is of course based on Alexander Pushkin's tale poem. So let's go problem by problem and see what could have been a solution here. Problem number 1. Snow White as a helpless damsel in distress. Disney's 1937 version of Snow White is criticized for being weak and passive, waiting to be rescued rather than taking control of her own fate. Disney animation, of course, was groundbreaking. The expressive, bright-colored animation and musical storytelling made Snow White iconic. The 1951 Soviet version of The Tale of the Dead Princess and Seven Knights, based on Pushkin's tale, was not as groundbreaking in terms of animation. It simply followed the tradition of the Soviet realism art. However, this particular animated feature film has elements of iconography in it, with its elegant stylized movement, which gives the story an ethereal fairy tale beauty. If you look at the Snow White in the 1951 version, she has big eyes and small mouth, which is similar to the saints portrayed on icons, and her kokoshnik, the headwear, is similar to the halo of the saints on icons. She looks down often because she's modest and young and maybe a little bit shy, but her posture is always royal. Disney's 1937 version of Snow White is also kind and innocent and modest and cheerful. She wins over the hearts of the huntsmen and the dwarves and the prince and the forest animals with her kindness and caring nature. She remains optimistic despite the hardship, and she brings joy into people's lives. Russian version of the Snow White might not be as playful, but she's equally noble and pure, which are the main virtues of the Russian folklore. She's a princess, but she's simply dressed. Her mother passed away after labor, but her father is still alive in the story, which I think Disney should have done in 2025 a live-action remake, because it adds additional layer of conflict and the evil queen would not be able to operate so openly. The first time we meet the princess, she seems to be someone who has royal dignity and femininity despite growing up without a mother. She treats those around her with grace and respect, whether it's the knights or the old beggar woman or the prince himself. So the 1937 version of Snow White is this cheerful and light-hearted and playful version of the princess, while the Soviet version and Pushkin's version brings more of a mysterious charm and poetic beauty to the character. Pushkin is no doubt a master of female portrait. I highly recommend to check him out if you haven't yet. And both princesses have special connection with nature. Disney's Snow White has this special bond with the forest animals who provide companionship and even help her with the chores. This emphasizes her innocence and also the harmony of her character. The Dead Princess, the Soviet version of Snow White, also embodies this connection to nature. She travels through the forest without fear. She's in fact collecting mushrooms in the beginning of the story, and she has this special bond with a dog that greets her in the house of the knights. Now, if you consider the Disney version of Snow White a weak character, which I disagree with, because she is a very strong character in a quiet, feminine way. She doesn't physically fight back the evil, but she wins through perseverance, kindness, and faith in good overcoming evil. But if she is considered a weak character, let's take a look at the Soviet version of Snow White. When her jealous stepmother sends her away to be abandoned in the forest, betrayed, by the way, by her friend, the dead princess does not panic or despair. Instead, she maintains her composure, showing inner resilience. She faces her trials with grace, faith, and endurance, rather than aggression or revenge. She endures hardship without losing the nobility of her character. She does not physically resist her fate, although she never gives up on herself, ever, and she always maintains her dignity and faith, which ultimately leads to her revival in love. After being left in the wild, she finds shelter with the knights, who treat her with respect and admiration. We will take a better look at the knights a little later. She quickly adapts to her new lifestyle. She doesn't seem to miss the royal life at all. By the way, in the Pushkin story, she doesn't know that her stepmother ordered her death, but deep inside she suspects that someone wanted her dead and that someone lives with her. So as an intelligent person, she makes a decision to lay low and do not go back to the palace for a time. And she never forgets who she is or whom she loves. And that leads me to the next problem the live action remake was facing with the 1937 version, and that is number 2, non-consensual kiss with a stranger. Now, regardless of whether you consider the prince in the original 1937 version a stranger or not, you have to admit that it is a fairy tale. If you look at it as a fairy tale, there is nothing weird in the fact that people fall in love through a song and stay in love for the rest of their lives. However, if you really need to modernize this tale and make it more suitable for modern audiences, and you're not comfortable with prince and princess knowing each other for a 3 minute of a screen time and falling in love right away, then the non-consensual kiss at the end might be a problem. In the live action remake, first of all, they get rid of the prince, who is now a bandit, and the thief who steals from the palace. He's more of an Aladdin or Flynn Rider rather than Prince Charming in this story. Again, just write a new story and call it A Princess and a Thief, for instance. Good name, by the way. You're welcome, Disney. But instead, they decided to write for Snow White and her bandit a song that has these lyrics: promise to wake me up with a kiss, giving consent to the kiss that is going to happen. And yes, the noble bandit has a much larger role in this film than Prince Charming in the original version, and he even has enough time in this film to scold Snow White for her princess problems. Well, the girl is an orphan. She's enslaved by her own stepmother in her own castle. She was almost killed just a few minutes ago, and she saved your life previously, and you still have the audacity to lecture her? That is, ladies and gentlemen, the ideal of the modern prince. Okay, who is a bandit. How Disney writers had to actually solve the problem of the non-consensual kiss. Let me tell you. Let's see what Pushkin did here. Greatest Russian poet, okay? Aha! We meet the prince and princess in the very beginning of the story, and they're already engaged to each other. Genius! A princess is betrothed to Prince Yelis when we first meet her. That's what princesses were actually doing in medieval times. They were betrothed when they were very little, and then they were shipped to foreign countries to be married. But that doesn't mean there's no love. In Pushkin's version and in 1951 animated version, Soviet animated version, these two, the prince and princess, are in fact in love, and we will see the proof of that a little bit later. Their feelings get tested throughout the story, and their romance is much more compelling and believable than the one the live action tried to create. If they only did this little tweak in the beginning of the story, that showing that the Snow White and the Prince Charming are already betrothed to each other, are already engaged, they could still sing the famous I'm Wishing song and the one song, my favorite one. How could they cut it out? I just can't. I don't know, why would they cut it out? And my prince will come. These songs are so iconic. How can you cut them out? I just don't understand. Yes, they wouldn't fall in love on screen, but they would be already in love on the screen they would be these lovebirds singing with each other and dreaming of the future together. They wouldn't have to spend an hour of screen time pretending to be in love, like in the live action version. That would literally solve the problem of the prince being the stalker and the stranger. And then they would be separated by fate, and then Snow White would embark on this journey all by herself, and then they would meet again at the end. The original story would be kept intact. It would also make more sense that he would be looking for her because she is his bride, not because he saw her for 3 minutes and then decided that he's gonna marry her. The next problem that the live-action remake had with the original story and that Pushkin's tale solved is number 3, Prince being one-dimensional character. In the beginning of the story of the Soviet animated film, Prince Yelis, that's his name, he doesn't bring much to the story. However, the whole third act belongs to him. In the beginning of the second act, we learn that the palace learned that the king's daughter, the Tsar's daughter, is missing, and they started to ring the bells. The father, who is again alive in the story and he doesn't know anything about the evil queen's agenda, he embraces his son-in-law, blesses him, and then Yelis, after praying fervently to God, embarks on this journey to search for his bride. Rumors spread and caused a panic. What? The Tsar's own daughter vanished. Mournful was the Tsar that day, but the young Prince Yelis offered God a fervent prayer and departed then and there to seek out and homeward guide his sweet-tempered youthful bride. Then we forget about him for a time until we come back to his character in the third act, where he's chasing the sun and the moon and the wind and questions them about his bride. These are the magical folk elements in the story that make this venture very poetic. So in the entire second act, he has been looking for his bride. He continues looking for her in the third act, and we really vouch for this character at this point because he is our last hope. When the wind finally remembers where his bride is and Yelis learns that his lady is in a coffin in a cave, that moment really breaks your heart as he bends over in despair. So we see emotion there, we see conflict there. And Yelis in the story, this Prince Charming character in the story, is first of all very faithful. Secondly, he is truly in love, and you can feel there's a relationship that was built here. Another important thing, he is in good relationship with the father of the bride. He's also praying to God fervently, which means he's a good Orthodox Christian man, and we want our princess to marry a good Orthodox Christian man. And he never gives up. He looks for his bride tirelessly. He questions the forces of nature, the sun and the moon and the wind. He literally chases the wind until the wind tells him where his bride is. I mean, even that one thing deserves our respect. He didn't just show up in the beginning with the song and at the end with the song. Pushkin drew an active and noble and resilient character that we love the princess to marry to. So Yelis goes and finds the cave and finds his bride in the coffin, in a glass coffin. And this is what happens in the Pushkin's tale. It's a little bit different from the animated version. Take a listen. There he saw in shadows dismal sway the coffin made of crystal, where the princess lay at rest in the deep sleep of the blessed. And the prince in tears dissolving threw himself upon the coffin. And it broke. The maiden straight came to life, sat up, in great wonder looked about, and yawning, as she sat her bed seesawing, sat with pretty arms outstretched. Gracious me! How long I've slept. Down she stepped from out the coffin. Oh, the sighing and the sobbing. Carrying his bride he strode. Back to daylight. Home they rode. However, in 1951 Soviet animation, Yelis does kiss the bride. So they kept this element from the original 1937 version. But in any case, the dead princess rises and comes back to life. So the live-action version could have made them engaged from the beginning of the story, so that the kiss at the end would make sense. Or they could have kept the things the way they were in the beginning, but instead of the kiss at the end, they could have used the broken coffin metaphor. Either would work. Instead, they kept the kiss but also gave a weird consent for it. But also, the kiss was not even the climax of the story, and you feel absolutely nothing when she lays in the coffin and then she rises from the dead, which should be the moment where you cry. That's the moment where you should be crying, but not emotional at all. Problem number 4. Evil queen only wanting to be the fairest of them all. While writing the live-action feature film, the Disney writers, for some reason decided that being the fairest of them all is not large enough of an ambition for an evil queen, even though we know, as a matter of fact, envy and jealousy can steer anyone towards ruin. There's a very important moment in the original 1937 version of Snow White that live-action remake completely disregarded. It's the moment when the prince is singing the one song and the Snow White is on the balcony, listening to him smiling and sending a kiss through the dove. And then the camera reveals that the evil queen was watching this scene, and she seems very upset about it. Why is she so upset? If she hates Snow White that much, she could have married her off to that guy and wait a few years until Snow White would start having babies and loses her youthful charm. That would be an easy solution, right? It's not just about her hating Snow White and envying her beauty. There's something deeper happening here. The narcissist queen cannot tolerate someone's happiness because she herself is so deeply unhappy. She can get satisfaction, but she cannot get joy, love, and content, happiness. By this point, she already knows that Snow White is the fairest of them all, is fairer than her. But this scene with the prince is the last nail in Snow White's coffin. This determines her destiny. Not only the queen hates the fact that she now has such an effect on men, now that she is a grown woman, a flower that bloomed, but also she hates the fact that despite all of her efforts to make Snow White miserable, Snow White still looks happy and content and in love. That's what the narcissist queen cannot tolerate. How can someone not be miserable when I want them to be miserable? And following this logic, if you can't bend someone to your will, you make them disappear. And that's exactly what she does. This is a very well-written character, and she has a very believable arc that we're going to talk about it in a minute. Now, the queen in the live-action version is such a mess. She's thirsty for power, she murders her husband, and she's a witch, and she has so much power that she can turn white flour into red flour, or vice versa, and then turn the flour into ashes, which is much more power than the 1937 version of the queen had. However, if this queen, the evil queen from 2025 version, she has so much power that she can turn living things into ashes, why didn't she do it with Snow White right away? So here she wants to be the fairest of them all, and the richest of them all, and the most powerful of them all. Disney, just pick one. Okay? If you look at the greatest villains in film history, there's this one trait that stands them apart and makes them truly evil. I mean, look at us. We're all sinners, but there's usually one sin that is particularly hard to get rid of, that possesses our soul. And vanity is the sin of the evil queen. There are sins that are connected to each other and cannot be separated from each other. For instance, the queen can be simultaneously vain, proud, and jealous. But she cannot be vain, proud, and jealous and also thirsty for power, at least not in a fairy tale. If she does want the throne, since she is a queen, she probably wanted it, but if she wants it, she only wants it to be admired for her beauty, so more people can see her and more people can admire her. However, if she wants the throne to rule, then the beauty of things should not matter so much to her. If you remember all the classic Disney villains, there's always one thing they're after. Scar wants to be the king instead of his brother. Ursula wants to humiliate Triton and take what is his. Maleficent wants to punish the king and the queen for not inviting her to the party. Frollo wants Esmeralda, and Jafar wants to become the most powerful man on earth. And the evil queen from Snow White wants to be the fairest of them all. This is her one trait, one sin that makes her sink so low. We don't know anything about her thirst for power or her ambition to rule or her preferring diamonds to flowers, or her relationship with the rest of the palace, but we do know that she is vain. She is envious of Snow White's beauty because she values beauty above all. The same stands for the Soviet version of the queen that is also a very wholesome character. Let's take a look. The moment we meet Tsaritsa, this evil queen, she's already standing there with a mirror, which tells you all. In Pushkin's tale, she's described as a woman who was meant to be a queen. She, if one be strictly truthful, was a born Tsaritsa youthful. Slim, tall, fair to look upon, clever, witty, and so on, but she was in equal measure stubborn, haughty, willful, jealous. In her dowry rich and vast was a little looking glass. It could speak with perfect diction. Only with this glass would she in a pleasant humor be. Many times a day she'd greet it, and coquettishly entreat it. Tell me, pretty looking glass, nothing but the truth I ask. Who in all the world is fairest, and has beauty of the rarest? And the looking glass replied, You, it cannot be denied. You in all the world are fairest, and your beauty is the rarest. The translation, of course, cannot reflect all the beauty and poetry of Pushkin's language, but the idea here is clear. This is a haughty, jealous woman who is obsessed with self-image. Her sins are vanity, envy, and pride, not vanity and pride and the desire to defeat communism. That could have worked in the Soviet version, I presume, but they didn't go with it because monarchs are inherently bad, according to socialists, so it would make sense for the evil queen to be wanting to uphold monarchy and defeat communism, but they didn't go along with this version because in the original Pushkin's tale this was not a case. However, they did take out a few lines from the Pushkin's tale that mention God, but yeah, they did that a lot. So having two big goals, big agendas, big desires for a fairy tale villain just doesn't work. It has to be either or. That's why it's so jarring to watch the live action version where the evil queen is defeated by Snow White, is overthrown, and is told to run. But instead, she decides to go back to the mirror and ask it who is the fairest of them all once more, when she already knows that Snow White is alive and she is the fairest of them all. And then she breaks the mirror when she doesn't like the answer, and the mirror sucks her in. By the way, the seeds of her life being somehow connected to the life of the mirror was never established. Like, these seeds were never planted. That comes as a big surprise to the audience and is very confusing. Also, it was confusing because if the kingdom was at stake, then she should have died when the kingdom was taken away from her, right? But if the beauty was at stake, if her being the fairest of them all, then she should have died the moment she saw Snow White coming in and being alive. That's exactly what happened to the Pushkin's evil Tsaritsa, evil queen, and the Soviet version of the evil queen. She was so sure that she got rid of Snow White, and she was content for a while until she saw Prince Yelis and the princess entering the gates of the palace. By the way, this is more shocking in Pushkin's story and in the Soviet version because there was no mentioning of the antidote to the poisoned apple. So neither Yelis nor the queen knew that the princess can be awakened from her slumber. So the fact that the love that Yelis and the princess have defeats the evil of the queen is a real miracle in this story. And since the queen did not anticipate the princess rising from the dead, the shock of seeing her alive kills her. This is what happens. The Tsaritsa leaped and smashed on the floor her looking glass. Rushing to the door, she saw the fair young princess walk towards her. Overcome by grief and spite, the Tsaritsa died that night. This feels like a poetic justice, and it's so satisfying to watch how evil is defeated by its own spitefulness and jealousy and envy. The live action version could have chosen this path, but instead it decided to over-explain things, find logic in the evil, and even give a song to Gal Gadot where she explains herself. This is the moment, by the way, when my daughter started to cry in the movie theater and we had to take her out. I honestly wanted to cry too. This was a big mistake. I mean, I'm sorry. As a result of all this and of her being sucked into the mirror at the end, it's not as satisfying to watch as the original 1937 version, where she tries to kill the dwarfs who chase her in a storm, and then the lightning strikes and she falls from the cliff and she dies screaming. That is so much more satisfying to watch, even as a kid, especially as a kid. And the most satisfying thing here is that she dies not as a beautiful young woman, but as the ugliest creature the earth has ever seen. Her true face that reflects the darkness of her soul. When she transforms into a literal monster on screen, ugly old person, to kill an innocent child, she cannot sink any lower than that. This is the bottom, and justice gets her here at this low point. She sold her soul for beauty, and she will die the ugliest creature alive. This is a poetic justice, similar to Dorian Gray's fate. By the way, the Soviet version queen is not a witch. The magic mirror happens to be in her possession, but that's where her power ends. She doesn't operate with magic. She probably poisoned the apple the old-fashioned way, but she uses her power as a queen to intimidate people, and then when it's time to take control of the things, she dresses as an old beggar woman and goes to the green oak grove where the princess resides. So there are no magic tricks here, no metamorphosis. And by the way, also in Pushkin's story, we do not know that the beggar woman is the evil queen until much later in the story, which creates this suspense. But yeah, she only plays the role of a beggar. She's not transforming into one. Well, the princess spins her wheel, and there's a metaphor here, of course, and the dog starts barking aggressively at the beggar, anticipating evil, and the princess comes out to stop the dog, but the dog prevents the princess to come close to the beggar. So the princess ends up just, instead of sharing the meal as she planned, she just throws a loaf of bread that she baked to the beggar woman. Again, she shows mercy and kindness to a stranger even before the beggar asks her anything. But the dog, its body woved around her feet, so there's this element of nature that is on princess's side and is trying to protect her. But the beggar, thanking the princess for the meal, throws her an apple, and we know how it goes. So without additional elements that the live-action film brings to the character of the evil queen, Pushkin already creates a nuanced antagonist. The evil queen's jealousy feels poetic and tragic rather than cartoonishly evil. And in the 1951 version, in the animated film, she's elegant and menacing and complex, exactly what the great villain should be. Pushkin's evil queen is driven by envy, but her downfall is poetic. Instead of sheer malice, she represents the dangers of unchecked jealousy. The 1951 film captures this beautifully, showing her as both regal and terrifying, making her a more compelling villain. Okay, enough about the evil queen. Let's move on to my favorite characters. Problem number 5. The Seven Dwarfs cannot be portrayed by little people. A major controversy in Disney's live-action remake is the decision to change the Seven Dwarfs into a more politically correct group of magical creatures, avoiding, as some see as, an offensive portrayal of little people. They tried to rewrite the dwarfs into 7 magical creatures, but then when the backlash happened, they brought back CGI dwarfs and then kept the magical creatures as bandits, and with the main bandit as the main love interest of Snow White instead of Prince Charming. I personally love 1937 Disney version of Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and I love the dwarfs there. They are a comic relief and they are active, helpful characters in the story. They are very lovable and fun, and I didn't hate the CGI dwarfs in the new version. I thought they were rather cute. However, the live-action story didn't really need them for the story they were creating. And that brings me back to Pushkin and his ideas and the tale of the Dead Princess and the Seven Knights. In Pushkin's story, the seven magic figures are not the dwarfs, but are valiant knights. They are noble, strong characters who honor and protect the princess. The 1951 Soviet animation portrays these knights as chivalrous, intelligent, and kind, reinforcing their roles as protectors rather than comic relief. And this way he avoids the controversy of portraying little people in a stereotypical manner. In European fairy tales, the helpers are often small magical beings like dwarfs or fairies. However, in Russian and Eastern folklore, guardians are frequently noble warriors, symbolizing chivalry and protection. This difference in cultural storytelling explains why Pushkin's version feels more grounded and heroic. Look at the first scene where we meet the knights in the story. Look at their epic entrance. So, using this Pushkin's idea, the live-action remake could have naturally avoided the issue by making the Seven Dwarfs Seven Knights, proving that alternative characterization was possible long before Disney's modern efforts to fix things. When the princess enters the House of the Knights for the first time, she makes an observation, just like Snow White in the 1937 version does. She sees that the house is messy and unrefined, but then she sees icons in the corner, which indicates that Orthodox Christians, good people, live here. That makes her trust that they won't offend her. So since she has no other place to go and to hide, she decides to clean the house and provide some value for the people who live here, in hopes of receiving kindness in return and being able to stay. She also serves the table, prepares everything for the arrival of the hosts. By the way, Princess in the Pushkin's version was never forced to do hard labor, scrub the floors in her own palace, like the 1937 version of Snow White. After all, her father is alive and he wouldn't allow that to happen. However, she does not shy away from honest work. She knows how to take care of herself and her surroundings. So this young princess immediately shows her worth. She seizes the opportunity, she takes control of her fate in that moment. She is intelligent and industrious. She understands that someone wished her dead, so she doesn't want to go back there. So she needs these strangers that she doesn't know yet on her side. When the knights finally arrive and they see their messy place transformed into this cozy cottage, this warm and welcoming place, they are astonished. The princess hides from them because she doesn't know what to expect. But then when she hears them welcoming her as a sister, she comes out from her hiding place, shows herself to the valiant knights. And the knights, the brothers, offer her wine and bread, the symbols of hospitality, so they officially invite her to reside with them. She, as a lady of the house, rose much later, moved about, dusting, polishing, and cooking, never once the knights rebuking. They too never chided her. Days flew by like gossamer. Unlike Disney's Snow White, who primarily takes a caretaker role, the Dead Princess is treated as a guest of honor, showing her inherent worth and dignity. She earns the loyalty and protection of the knights through her virtue and presence rather than servitude. Now, I would assume that many people would find this situation strange when a young woman resides with 7 handsome knights in the depth of the forest. It would be especially hard to sell to the American audience, but Pushkin, as a genius, anticipated this and created this beautiful scene. After a while living with the princess, the knights grew to love her. And once they approached her, saying, "As you know, you are our sister, but all 7 of us here are in love with you, my dear, and we all desire your favors. But that must not be. God save us. Find some way to give us peace. Be a wife to one at least. To the rest remain a sister." But you shake your head. Is this to say you offer your refuse? Nothing from our stock you'll choose? "Oh, my brave and bonny brothers, virtuous beyond all others," in reply the princess said, "God in heaven strike me dead if my answer be not honest. I've no choice, my hand is promised. You're all equal in my eyes, all so valiant and wise. And I love you all, dear brothers, but my heart is to another, pledged for evermore. One day I shall wed Prince Yelis. Hushed, the brothers kept their station, scratched their foreheads in frustration. As you wish, so now we know, said the eldest with a bow. Pray forgive us, and I promise you'll hear nothing further from us. I'm not angry, she replied. By my pledge I must abide. Bowing low, the 7 suitors left her room with passions muted. So in harmony again did they live and friendship reign. Just based on this scene, you can tell so much about what kind of characters these are. First of all, remember I mentioned in the beginning that the princess remained true to her betrothed. It also shows that she's a humble person who sees good in others. She knows how to speak to people without offending them or belittling them. Honestly, this was a tough situation for her, and she replied with dignity and wisdom. She acknowledged the virtues of her brothers, and she admits that she would be willing to marry one of them if she was free to do so. Even if it was not true, she said it so gently and delicately that no one felt offended. These are rare qualities in people nowadays. Both men and women tend to be cruel to the suitors that they reject. These are all the things the live-action Snow White could have done to help Snow White appear more mature and cunning and wise. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the 1937 version of Snow White. She makes the most out of every situation she finds herself in, and let's not forget that she's very, very young. In the Soviet animated version, the princess is at least 18 or 20 years old, and Snow White looks barely 16. It matters too for the sake of the story. The live-action remake could have made her older and wiser if they didn't like, for some reason, the playfulness of the 1937 version of Snow White, which seems like they didn't like. So there's so many nuances, so many things that could be added to the character to make it appear more mature. Now let's recap. Pushkin's tale poem and the 1951 animated version of Dead Princess and the Seven Knights solved the live-action remake's problems without any forced changes. The Dead Princess is feminine and strong, the Seven Knights avoid dwarf controversy, the evil queen has depth, and all of this was written in 1833. If only someone did the research. Instead of rewriting old stories to fit the modern narratives, maybe Disney should have taken a lesson from classic storytelling done right. Pushkin's tale of the Dead Princess and Seven Knights is a masterclass of storytelling. It respects traditional values while still offering strong characters and compelling drama. The 1951 Soviet adaptation further proves that a faithful adaptation can still feel fresh and timeless. Both 1937 version of Disney classic and the 1951 version of the classic Soviet animation present Snow White the princess as a character who is deeply kind and graceful and connected to the world around her. In the case of the live-action remake, modernized narrative resulted in the loss of the original charm of the story. Great storytelling doesn't need constant updates to fit the modern trends. Pushkin's tale remains relevant because it balances deep themes with a timeless fairy tale structure. Maybe instead of rewriting everything, we should appreciate and preserve the stories the way they are. But what do you think? Did Disney go too far with the live-action remake? Should they have taken inspiration from Pushkin's 1833 tale poem? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below, and please don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dive content. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you're told. Stay safe, stay strong. See you in my next video. Bye!